Anyway, so.
All right. I'm
cool.
recording.
You're recording? Me too.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Yeah, no, this is another
Back
good
in
episode.
action.
Yeah. That last episode did well, actually. Don't tell Antushka.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it did well. But anyway.
I actually never posted it. I don't know. I forgot.
You're a hit, Brother X.
Wow.
It's that
Cool.
sultry
Well,
voice.
Hopefully people come back for more.
Yeah, they will.
I mean,
we'll
because
see.
to be honest, I thought this article was a really nice follow-up. Like,
Yeah.
the other one really laid the groundwork for, the history, how we got to where we are. And then I thought, Richard A. Posner, like, really kind of got into some of the meat and potatoes of, like, the challenges and the why. And,
Right.
yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, no, and it's got a very good philosophical question at the end to ponder. I actually posted it on Instagram in my story. So we're reading, as you mentioned, article by Richard A. Posner called The Law and Economics of Intellectual Property, which is from the same set of articles, or this journal edition, publication, basically back in the spring of 2002, that Daedalus...
The Journal of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences.
Exactly, or pretentiously called Daedalus. Anyway, no, just kidding. Just kidding, sort of.
Yes,
anyway,
very pretentiously.
but yeah, Daedalus is at least shorter to say, and Daedalus. I don't know how to say it. But yeah, no, and it is a good article to follow up the last episode on, because for all the reasons you said, it had some good definitions. I think an argument could be made for this would have been a better one to start with. I see why because they actually put this article this was the first article in the edition.
It was.
And I think it was because it also does lay out some definitions really well. But I think it's neither here nor there. But yeah, like just right off the bat, intellectual property, what is it, and stuff like that.
Before we dive too deep,
Sure.
I do think maybe part of why the last episode did so well was your title.
Oh, maybe.
It's a very good title.
Thank you. Yeah. Which is, of course, a Seinfeld reference for anybody that doesn't know. It's a...
So there might have been more listeners, but maybe there were a lot of disappointed listeners. I don't know. Although to be fair, it was a podcast a lot about nothing. So.
Yeah, of course. Hey, no, I thought we hit on some good points. Consort. No, but well, maybe. Yeah. No, I think you're right. The title is important, but I like to think it's the riveting, fun material that we're discussing of intellectual property. But in all seriousness, so especially one sort of grand theme that I was thinking about as I was reading this is, I guess it sounds kind of funny to say, but lawyers really are basically social engineers. I mean, their job is to engineer society and create lawmakers, I should say, but most lawmakers are lawyers. And, I mean, certainly the lawmakers of this country were lawyers. I mean, Benjamin Franklin aside and whatnot, most of their pedagogy was law. And your job is to, as Richard Posner does in this, is think about the incentives that you're essentially creating for the society, and what qualities are you trying to bring out. And so actually, I feel like a good way to start is actually with the end, in some sense, where he discusses, I just thought this was a great paragraph. We don't know, as he says, how much intellectual property is in fact socially useful. And I think he's more saying here that it's obviously socially useful, but measuring that is difficult. And it's not, there's not one person that has made that decision. It's a complicated thing. So he goes on to say, and therefore we do not know how extensive a set of intellectual property rights we should create. For all we know, too many resources are being sucked into the creation of new biotechnology, computer software, films, pharmaceuticals, and business methods because the rights to these different forms of intellectual property have been too broadly defined. It's just a very interesting thing because, I mean, I think especially in terms of pharmaceuticals, I think the copyright duration does create interesting incentives for people to try to basically just come out with blockbuster drugs, whereas other sort of cheaper drugs could potentially, that might take longer to appreciate. So maybe this is an argument to increase the laws, for instance, or decrease the definition of what you can actually patent in terms of a drug, and all that stuff. But I think specifically duration is probably the easiest thing to change. But anyway, that was just an example of where I went, and I just wanted to start with that because I thought that was a very provocative point. Is that maybe this is actually a cause of a lot of our issues. It's the definition in the law.
I think, and again, it doesn't necessarily make it any easier, but I think that is a really interesting perspective on it, just in terms of, again, I'm thinking more in terms of the realm of music, but when you think about sort of what sells and what doesn't, and you try to then look at that through the lens of, usefulness to society. But even, I think even there, one of the things that was making me think about is that, and I don't know if this is true in other fields or not, but a lot of what artists profit off of isn't necessarily the copyright of their intellectual property. But it is sort of the monopoly that they have as an artist on their persona, their image. Just like, for example, when it comes to like prices for concert tickets and how those are dictated. People will pay a lot to see Taylor Swift compared to, Duo Tandem. And it's not necessarily a measure of how much an individual.
Sorry.
It's not necessarily a measure of how much an individual likes the music. It is partly a measure of how many individuals and the sort of incentives that capitalism then, or the stresses that capitalism puts on the sale of a ticket in a limited size venue. But it's about the fact that it's like, that's the one and only Taylor Swift. It's not even necessarily, I would say, the intellectual property of her music.
Not anymore, but it started with that.
It did, yeah. But it's sort of interesting there, like when, and I guess that's getting a little beyond sort of the realm of intellectual property specifically, but just, because again, I think one of the things that we hit on last time was, just the sort of the trope around how hard it is to make a living as an artist.
Right.
But, this sort of speaks to that, is that there's a lot of ways that people, I think, find other ways to monetize the work. But I think to get back to sort of this balance of what the law, the social engineering of law, one thing that really, and I haven't thought deeply about this, but I'd be curious if you have a hot take on it. Like if you look on page 11, on the right side of the page, second paragraph down, this is very descriptive and great podcasting for our listeners, but Posner's talking about, and he touches on this throughout the article, but he sort of talks about the two functions, I think, or the two things that you're balancing with copyright law. And it's the balance between the encouraging of the production and the promotion of its widespread use.
Right.
And I know this is related, but like for me, it's really, I think, much more clearly about, can an artist support themselves to do that work? Or can a creator of any kind of intellectual property support themselves to do that work? And I know I told you I didn't read them carefully, but I think that is one of the things that Condorcet got into in their article, or their excerpt later.
Who was the French...
Yeah, just like that...
18th century or something.
Yeah, just that concept of like recognizing that people who create these ideas and put them out in their form of expression have to be able to support themselves to do that. And, Condorcet's argument at the time, I'd be curious what Condorcet would say if he was alive today, was that, copyright law wasn't the best way to do it. So it was the same argument, I think, about the purpose of the law and the way to structure them for the functioning of society. But it was interesting because I felt like it wasn't strictly about like the public good that we touched on so much last time. It was about, again, just sort of how do these ideas manifest in society, like to not only be spread around, but to be created in the first place, you know?
Right. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, because I mean, it's just making me wonder, because that's getting into a lot of things about the rent seeking, for instance, and stuff that he discusses. Because I feel like that's ultimately also what a lot of this social engineering question's getting at. Is Posner's argument is that if you have intellectual property, if you allow it to well, okay, sorry. I think we need to back up. I think I need to back up.
All right, let's back up.
So that brought up a lot of points, but I feel like it makes sense to get into the rent-seeking stuff. But to do that, then we need to talk about a lot of other stuff. We like what is copyright and trademark, I think. And
yeah, okay. Let's go all the way back to that.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, very broadly, intellectual property, he breaks down into kind of four things: patents, which are property rights in useful ideas; copyright, which is property rights in expression; trademarks, which are identifiers to protect consumers from being misled; and then trade secrets, which are basically patents, but for companies. That's kind of how I think about it, but I'm sure it expands beyond that. And so most of what we talk about is copyright, because what we're talking about, like music, I think that's all under copyright. And so one point that's made about copyright is that the one big difference between intellectual property and physical property is that physical property is more tangible. You don't have this tracing problem, and the tracing problem is especially prominent in copyright in terms of how do you define it. We talked about that at the last episode.
What is a work?
What is a work? Yeah, and patents, you can see how that's a little bit more definable. It's like a schematic, but with a copyright, we're talking about, again, property right in expression. Expression is an amorphous thing.
Right.
So...
and that was one of the distinctions, right, is that the copyright is specifically on the expression, not the idea itself.
Right. And so this sort of leads to one big difference in how intellectual property is treated versus physical property, and that is that the duration that you get to own IP is limited, whereas you think about it, duration in physical property isn't limited. So that's an important point, and the reason is, the justification is this tracing problem is sort of, I would say, the main reason. And so then he gets into this very, I think, interesting point, saying how when you have, I guess, a growth of a field, you have, and he uses the example of the New World, basically, and just when you have land, for instance, that is, available, and we won't get into whether it's it's
available.
Yeah, available is in quotes here,
right?
But this basically creates a rent-seeking behavior where you have an excessive investment. Okay, what is it? It's excessive profit in excess of cost. That's what you're trying to get, is because you're trying to basically. People are trying to capitalize on this new frontier as much as they can beyond the actual asset that they have. And intellectual property essentially is always in this state because there's always more that could be created. So that's the idea, is you have this influx of new land, people are trying to grab it up, and that was the rent-seeking behavior there. In intellectual property, you're always in a creation mode. And so this then... needs to be combated by limiting duration, which...
and I think my understanding was, the duration is, it's sort of a check on the race to get there, right? Because if he talks a lot about, like, literary works that are, spin-offs of the idea presented in, Homer's works, right? And so if the copyright was on the idea itself and you had perpetual duration on that, the value of that idea would be so great, right?
Yes, yeah.
In a way that just doesn't exist in physical property rights. But then, and the other thing that was interesting too, and I feel like this never fully got resolved, was just, people do, I think, have a sense of creating sort of, wealth for heirs. But when you talk about in perpetuity, like, that's a concept I think most people, like, it doesn't sort of increase the value in most people's minds of, like, this is still going to be, if you said it was forever and somebody thought this is still value for my children versus this is value for 10 generations later, like, I think for most people that's sort of an irrelevant value add, right? And so I think that's the point, that, like, sort of perpetual rights on the intellectual property are kind of meaningless to most people. Right, and
he was making that point, is that, you'd sort of rather take the money now than in the future. I mean, that's, that's essentially it, and you don't care as much about the far future because we're animals that still mostly live in the present, though we try not to. I think that's exactly right. And so, I mean, I'm trying, so, it's funny because I think the crux of this is then, yes, getting back to what you were saying about Condorcet, Cetera, whatever his name is.
I think it's Condorcet.
Condorcet, yeah. I just, I'm just being silly. I think you're right. It's about balancing the incentive of creation, because that's the other thing he always gets back to, is that if you limit the duration, he talks about this with reference to marginal. I guess this was an interesting also point. Margin cost, basically meaning the cost to distribute your product to, like, one more person.
Right.
The optimal distribution is when you have optimal output is achieved when the marginal cost is equal to the price, I guess, that you make.
Right.
But for software, this would be zero, because it's basically costs you zero to reproduce software. So he uses, like, computer code as an example for why kind of new laws are needed in IP in 2002, and still probably now. And the point is, though, that, if you limit it so that you basically don't own, you limit the duration to zero, essentially, so that you don't own intellectual property at all. Like, the moment you create it, it's not yours. That would decrease the incentive that people would have to make things, right? And supposedly. So, but I was thinking, is that always true? Because you have a very vibrant open source community in the programming space, like Linux and Ubuntu. And I don't know how, I mean, I assume Posner is familiar with this, but I mean, there are a lot of people who think all code should be free. And because you have the best developments occurring that way, right? It's actually, because people are just sort of working for the sake of work. And actually, an interesting sort of real example of this is an article that actually our mother sent me, which was, I think, in the New York Times or something.
Mom.
Yeah. That was about, they found basically this just random German guy found a bug in one of the Linux sort of software packages, utils XY or something like that. And just a very esoteric thing. He just noticed there was like this weird thing in it that would allow people a backdoor into the system and could compromise a lot of computers that had Linux, which is a lot. But the point is, this was just a random person, wasn't doing it for profit, was just working. And, this is just what happens when you let creativity go wild. People are going to find all the issues. and solve all the problems.
Get more eyes on it.
Yeah.
Which, when you get into, like, there are similarities, but when you get into artistic work, there's not sort of that same, problem solving element to it.
Yes. Well, it comes down to...
But obviously you have a lot of people who do it for the love of it, right?
Right.
You and I probably fall into that at this point.
I think so. I think it's very... we very much fall in... I certainly do.
But, yeah, I mean, I'm not paying my bills from performing.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I don't know. So then there's still that question, though, of... And again, I don't know what the differences would be with something like, software or medical, like the biomedical world. But, in the artistic world, I guess the question is, and actually I think I know the answer to this, but like, when you aren't able to do something as much, can you do it as well? And I'm using very vague, undefinable terms for a reason, but in general, in the broadest general sense, I think that's generally true that you can't. Now, again, it's not to say that there aren't going to be people that aren't highly capable, because the subjectivity of art, obviously, and then, in the software world, I mean, you might not be creating, like, writing software for your job, or maybe you are and you still do the open source stuff on the side. Like, there's all kinds of like reasons why those models can still work, but these people are still supporting themselves in some way, right? And so the question is, like, I don't know, like, what's the balance there, and have we figured it out in the best way possible for society?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this is exactly the question that I wanted us to think about, which is because I mean that's the whole question that Posner is posing at the end is, do we have the balance of incentive versus profit correct? And really the pharmaceutical companies I was thinking about were the opiates companies, because it's like you just gotta think that was such a get rich quick scheme in some sense. It's like they basically, if you know about chemistry, you basically, it's not super easy, but it was early enough in that you just make a synthetic opioid and then market it, right? And
don't do the problem solving.
Yeah, and so here's one question is like, should they have been able to patent something that people have been using for thousands of years, opium.
Right. Well, and I think, I think in that case too. Well, okay. So actually, sorry, that's a really good point that I don't want to gloss over. Right. What were they patenting? And actually, this is something I wrote, and I think it's sort of relevant here. This is something I wrote in the margin again with respect to music, but I don't remember why I had this. Oh, when he was talking about the Andy Warhol Brillo box, which is recreations of a box of Brillo pads. Right. And the question is like, all right, so that's art, and people, because of what was going on in the art world at the time, it was considered art. It provoked thought in a way, right? Should it be copyrightable? And those are two different questions, right? Is it art versus is it something that somebody can own? Those are two separate questions. And your example right now of, patenting opium is probably really similar, right? Yeah,
well, so, obviously without knowing the details of it, and of course, somebody made an argument that it was patentable. So, I think the answer is already out there. But the reason I pose it is that I know one of the big...
the answer of was it or the answer of should it have been?
Well, right? And one of the things I know that they were at least marketing it as was that it was non-addictive, which we all know is horseshit. And I'm sure they were using the fact that it was synthetically altered as a sort of reason for that, because like, of course you're saying it's different and it has this different quality because opium obviously is addictive, as is the synthetic, by the way. And so that's sorry,
go ahead.
Well, and so this is this is the point, is that, potentially you could say chemically it is different enough, but as they sort of make the point in here, patents are generally, I think, almost exclusively about the use, the utility. It's got to be a novel utility.
Sure.
Let me just, I'm trying to find that quick.
And now it's like sort of getting into the world of, to draw the analogy back to music, like arrangement, transcription, reworking,
right.
variation on a theme, right? There are limits to the copyrightability of derivative works, right? In art, in music.
Right.
Was that a derivative work of nature, to get back to where the reason there were no copyright laws 2,500 years ago, like something that came from God, from nature, from,
right.
not from humans.
Exactly. And you know what? This question could be made for a lot of other drugs. There's a lot of cancer drugs that the Greeks have been using for, rather, we know the ancient Greeks used because they were described in Dioscorius, who we talked about.
Yeah. So I think another thing that this sort of helps crystallize for me, to be honest, I brought up that one section of the Posner where and again, he touches on it a lot, but this balance between encouraging the production and promoting the widespread use. And I think that's actually a really good example. I was saying, like, it should be more about, can an artist support themselves to do their work? And I think the reason that registers with me is because in art, a lot of us do this out of the love of it, but then we want to be able to support ourselves in this society to be able to continue doing that work that we love. Right. And when you're talking about like opiates now, you're talking about somebody who didn't do it for the love of it, but they did it to get rich, right? So the incentive, because of the patent law, was wrong, meaning that law didn't serve our society in the way that it should have.
Yes.
If it's supposed to encourage the necessary work, the work that benefits society, it didn't do that. It encouraged somebody to try to make money and clearly hide, all the negatives of it to make money, right? As opposed to sort of the pure, no work's truly pure, I'm sure, but the pure work of trying to like create something for the betterment of society, create a drug for the betterment of society, right?
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. Yeah.
So we need to now lobby our lawmakers to change our patent laws. That's I think where we're at, right?
Yeah.
Can we rally the podcast listeners? Do you have enough of a base that we can make this change happen?
Too bad most of our base are anarcho-capitalists who think the state shouldn't exist.
So
they would rather die than call the state.
Should we march on the state that we don't believe in?
Yes. We'll march in a circle.
Oh, God.
Or maybe, I don't know, something philosophical, like a figure eight. No, but you articulated exactly, I think, the point that I'm trying to highlight. That's it, is this question, it's like, maybe they should be, because there's all of these examples of how the patent law is being abused by pharmaceutical companies. And that's the one thing you don't hear a lot of people talking about, I think. I don't know, though.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm just not paying attention to the right sources.
I'm not reading.
Well, but I just mean when I read about it in like the New York Times or the Wall Street, they're not highlighting that point. They're highlighting, that the victims, as they should, and they're
highlighting the victims, and the lawsuits are going after the pharmaceutical companies, but they're not going after changing the laws that made the pharmaceutical companies act in the way that they did.
Right. Yes, because they have a lot of money. I mean, I told you this, right? And do I make this public?
I don't know. Don't do it. Tell me later.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Edit this part out.
Yeah. Well, it's just to say that without being detailed, it's just it's very well known how much money you can make if you go into the pharmaceutical industry as a doctor or a PhD or something like that, and gloated about and compared I've seen compared to like sports teams. People are like, oh, people think sports is where the money's at. But no, they don't know anything. Look at how much this, anti-TNF alpha antibody made 15 billion in 2015, It's like, in the NBA made 1 billion. It's like, whatever. So that's the point.
I don't know that there's any pharmaceutical people that own sports teams, but the people who own the sports teams are people that have that kind of money,
Right. And so here's
the athletes make a lot of money,
yes.
but they make a lot of money from people that have a lot more money.
Right. And here's the question: are we healthier because of it? Because that's what we're supposed to be.
Yeah, I'm sure.
My answer is no. We're not. In fact, life expectancy is going down.
Yeah. People could maybe make an argument about on balance compared to a certain number of years ago, but I think even if you want to make a broad statement like that, you can still look at certain things that are happening and say that they're not good for the benefit of society or people.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. And again, just to get back to that Stephen Breyer quote that I opened the last one with, laws are supposed to serve people.
Yes.
I don't know. I guess I'm just assuming that we all agree with that, but it makes sense to me, right?
Well, but that's the thing is I think that a lot of people look at it, a lot of lawmakers look at it more from the standpoint of manipulation, right? And again, you can look at it from whatever perspective you want. In some sense, you could build a narrative that you've got evildoers trying to manipulate the population for the worse, or that you have benevolent benefactors that are trying to guide you in a certain way to live your best life, right? However you want to spin it. But the truth is, the role of the people that make the laws is to create incentives. And we need to always be analyzing the incentives and what the outcomes of the incentives are. And in the case of health, if it's a pharmaceutical company, the highest outcome is health, And we have to ask then, is that outcome being served? And it's obviously not.
Right.
Because of you see all the suicides it's not suicides, but you could look at them overdoses, right? Essentially as people killing themselves slowly.
Right.
And it's just, that's blatantly what a pharmaceutical company should not want to be happening. That's not what they're around for.
First,
don't kill people.
Do no harm.
Do no harm, exactly. Yeah. Ooh.
So,
are we riled up yet? Yeah, you're right. Okay.
So what's the highest incentive for a musician?
To inspire.
Yeah. To rile up. To calm down.
Yeah,
I think you feel something.
Yes, exactly. Which I think is kind of inspiration. But I think it's to make people move.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's another interesting point. I'm trying to remember where it was. That it was like this assumption that he made. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, I talked about that.
Well, I don't know if this will take us off the deep end of something.
Oh, it's okay.
But one thing I thought was really interesting, and again, talking about Condorcet.
Yeah.
Who actually, can we just acknowledge his full name and title real quick? Did you catch this?
I didn't read it, so.
Okay. His full name, and it looks like, and I haven't looked into this, but it looks like Condorcet is part of his title, official title, but his full name is Marie-Jean-Antoine Nicolas de Caritat Marquis de Condorcet.
God.
So let's just call him Marie, all right?
Yeah, okay.
Marie. So what Marie...
Era? Do you remember what era? Is it 18th
this
century?
This is like 16th century.
This is 16th. 16th?
I think.
1500s?
Yeah. Published... Freedom of the Press was published in 1776. 16th century.
Wait, 1776?
Yeah.
18th century. 1700s, 18th century.
18th century. My bad. 18th century.
I'm editing this out. You knew that. I'm editing it out. Don't worry.
That's fine. You don't have to edit that
well,
out.
I'm editing it out.
I made a mistake.
But yeah, 18th century. It's revolutionary
18th
times.
century.
Yeah.
Marie.
Right.
Do you know what a marquis is in French society?
It's a good question because you have that a lot. Marquis.
Marie was a marquis.
Obviously,
anyway.
just it's the French resistance movement during the German occupation.
There you go.
Oh, Maki. No, whoops. Okay, sorry, I forgot the R. Yeah,
so
it doesn't matter.
Marie's point is, Marie does talk about, and this is why I'm really curious what he would think nowadays, because obviously our society, our economic system is set up differently than it was in 18th century France, right? Mm-hmm. But and he talks about like patronage and subscriptions as a way to support creators of intellectual property. So his argument isn't that people who create intellectual property shouldn't be supported and rewarded for their work. But his point was, again, and I think it's talking about incentives, that I'm just going to use the genders that he does, right? But his point is like men of genius are going to do their work regardless, and so they should be supported and rewarded, but that the fruits of their labor should then be accessible. And he's talking specifically about like books and saying, book can circulate freely. A book that can circulate freely and that does not sell at a third above its price will almost never be. He's talking about counterfeiting,
right.
And that if you aren't having, and his point is in that area was that, if you've got an author that's profiting off their book and the publisher that also has to recoup the cost of publication and distribution, now the prices get jacked up, and then that incentivizes counterfeiting. But anyway, it's making me think about, what's the appropriate cost of distribution of something, right? Software companies, we talk about this, like you can, create and distribute software now because it's digital, like for very little cost, and obviously now the cost of the software is that you're supporting the team that's consistently updating, working out bugs, things like that. If it's not open source, right, you have to have people that are paid to do that. In other realms, like I know we're getting a little bit out of it now, but like there were physical CDs for music. There were physical CDs for software in the past. So there are physical products sometimes that have to be created. But this is outside of copyright a little bit, but now just with selling a physical product, we don't really have. We've got these regulations in terms of time limit on the intellectual property, but we don't have the same types of regulations because it's set by the market on what you can sell something for. And I think that's a lot of the time, it's not just the intellectual property itself, but it's that we give somebody a monopoly and then they sell it for whatever they want. And because they're the only one, they can sell it for a lot, as opposed to say, maybe like a drug. It's not that they would have the monopoly on it, but because they own the patent to it, now they collect a licensing fee on anyone else that creates and distributes it, and would systems like that kind of keep costs down. But like just this question of like, what can you sell a product for? And again, do our laws as they currently stand, do they serve society in the way that we need?
Yeah, no, it's interesting points, like a subscription model for licensing. But when you say that, I think it's subscription in some sense. So you're paying.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking
fee.
about like if I record and release a cover, like I pay. I don't collect the entirety of the money for that because some of it goes to the author of it who holds the copyright. I would hold the mechanical license in that case, right? I would collect money for the physical recording that I put time, effort, and money into, right? But then the writer's share and the publisher's share, like I wouldn't be able to own any of that because I didn't write the damn song, right?
But I guess that's
and
the
I don't
point.
know,
Is it seems like the system's in some sense already like that,
right?
In like that.
Well, in music it is, but is it like that in pharmaceuticals? Because they,
licensing.
do they when you don't license a drug, right? I mean, isn't that why they're so expensive? Because like somebody patents it and they can sell it for whatever they want because they're the only one who can manufacture it for a period of time.
I mean, I think it does exist in like that, especially probably during the pandemic, whereas you would have, if you want to call this the same type of licensing, where they will partner with a company to help them distribute because they needed to expand the distribution process so much. And so I don't know if you want to call that licensing, then that certainly exists. But terms of
that's like a deal with a distributor.
Yeah, but in terms of having like another company sell the same, vaccine or synthetic opiate or whatever, I don't think that exists. Basically, I think it's just after a period of time. And again, I should have looked this up. Let me look it up.
I mean, we're
almost
done. Talking about an article we wrote. We're not talking about the actual.
And the
we're not talking about reality here.
After like 10 years or something, I can't remember the exact date, but it's something like a decade or two. Then it just becomes a generic drug and anybody can make it. But yes, I don't know. Yeah,
and so I'm wondering, like, would that be like in music? If I write a song, right? I get to control the first use, right? The very first recording. I have to give permission for that. After that, anybody can record it and release it. But I'm always going to collect a share of that. Anytime that recording is played, anytime it's sold, I'm going to collect the writer's share of the money from that, right? And I don't know, would that be a better system for pharmaceuticals?
I don't know.
Moderna can come up with a drug, but immediately any other producer can produce it and sell it, and there's just always a portion of their sales that goes back to Moderna, and that's how Moderna then, again, like gets to profit off of their invention, their intellectual property.
Yeah, the problem is, I think that is an interesting way to do it, and I think should be experimented with, but I think also the more fundamental issue still comes down to that definition issue. It's like, I think that's where the problem arises a lot of like, maybe having the definition of what's different being too lax. Again,
of
going
what's
back,
different.
Like again, going back to the opiate. It's like maybe the synthetic opiates shouldn't have been allowed to say that they were different enough to be marketed, and potentially it should have just been a generic thing right off the bat.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think actually, as I say that, I think another aspect of it was the release mechanism. Probably is like the long acting. Like there's going to be some mechanism for releasing it. I think that's probably maybe an aspect of it.
That might be part of what they patent.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, all of this is just flying by the seat of my pants right now. So
yeah, that's true. We're speculating a lot. We don't actually know how what those patents look like.
Yeah, and we're more getting at the fundamental philosophy for the reason we already stated, because there was obviously an issue. There's obviously an issue.
Yeah.
But anyway, but the subscription model, I don't know. It might work. I don't know. But you're right. It's the ultimate thing is that you want to incentivize creativity and you want to incentivize people that are being creative to have the resources to continue putting all their time into that. As the point you were making earlier about how it's just the more time you put into something, the better you're going to be at it.
Yeah, I think any of these laws, at their best, what they're doing is they're saying, here's a need for society. Here is somebody who's doing it for the actual like love of it, for the quote unquote right reasons. And here's a law that I guess protects and empowers and encourages them to continue doing it for the right reasons. that would be, I think, what those laws do, how they function at their best. And I wonder how many of our laws actually function that way currently.
Yeah, I don't know. Because, I mean, and this is where it gets very complicated because it's, I think everybody can agree that, you shouldn't have 300,000 deaths from opiates, right? That's a very simple thing to get everybody on the same page about. But other things, when it comes to society and less tangible things, much more difficult to get everybody on the same page. And I think that is probably the big issue right now, is that this is another thing the article was getting me to think about, is the philosophy of lawyers matters a lot. Like, and the philosophy that we're teaching lawyers in schools matters a lot. Because, I mean, again, if these are the interpreters and the creators of the law, creators in many cases of the law, then they're imbuing their morality and their philosophy into the society. And I mean, again, this is obvious, but it's, I think, just worth reflecting on and reminding ourselves of this fact, because it's an important one. And I think a lot of the current tumultuousness in society is because we don't have a consensus philosophy. Maybe we shouldn't have a consensus philosophy, but it certainly doesn't exist right now. Everybody, I mean, it's a scattered landscape, and maybe that's okay, though. I don't know. But it does seem like all societies in the past were a little bit more cohesive. There was, you could point to, like, okay, in Scotland or in the Scottish Enlightenment, like, they were all sort of thinking, the common sense philosophy, for instance. And
I mean, is that just because sort of the way history gets recorded and written?
Yes, of course. Yeah, it's the narrative.
At some point, you have to just
generalize.
Yeah, I mean, again, like something we touched on last time is like the way you learn about certain things, like the way you learn about sonata form, it's a form, as opposed to when people were writing sonata form, it was just sort of a living, breathing exercise. It wasn't like Beethoven, again, he didn't sit down and pull out a textbook and say, I'm going to do this, this, and this.
Right. But I think I mean, you're right. It's a perspective. It's somebody's perspective always. But I think I do take the standpoint that history has these, it's difficult to pinpoint the centroid, I guess you could say, of the movement, whereas like the maximum time where everybody was thinking this. But I think there are peaks and troughs of philosophies, whereas like you have a maximum where a lot of people are thinking a certain way, and then a minimum. And during the minimum, we're probably just in a minimum right now, is I guess the point. And we'll probably consolidate into something and then break off.
Well, actually, I mean, to your point, like you do hear a lot of people talk about the way the internet, it allows people to sort of, I mean, communities of people, communities of thought can coalesce in a, that are locally dispersed, right?
Yeah, and the media landscape scattered.
So I think one of the things actually that you're reflecting on, which actually probably is accurate, I know I was originally trying to play devil's advocate, but I think one of the things that is accurate is that it was harder for like sort of ideas traveled more slowly. And so I think you're right. Like you would have areas and periods of time where there was more of a consensus. I mean, even like people just talk about like 50 years ago when you had 3 TV channels, just that there was
just
more
going to say that
national consensus, right?
Yes, exactly.
You're
media,
you're probably right about that.
And everybody, the media, the movies people were consuming, they were all the same. Now it's like there's like a billion different networks, and they all have a billion different streaming platforms. And like you could be like me, where it's like you just watch YouTube and listen to podcasts.
I get together with people, and they're talking about the shows they watch, and I haven't heard of a single one of them.
Yeah, exactly. And we both listen to podcasts, but it's like you don't listen to the ones I listen to. It's like even within the podcast realm, you can be scattered.
I just listen to podcasts about the NBA, to be honest.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's good. No more car talk. That was basically a podcast. Is sad. No, it's I was going to say, do you listen to Car Talk anymore? That was basically a podcast.
No.
It was a radio show, but yeah.
Yeah, they died, or one of them did.
Did they really? Ah, dang. Yeah. We're getting old, man. Yeah, but anyway.
But all of that is intellectual property.
Yeah. Yeah. It's their expression. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I don't know, man.
This is intellectual property.
It is. And everybody better remember that. This is going to be valuable someday.
I didn't say that.
You're probably right.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I thought this was a good article, though. I actually just generally a good series.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you're good. I guess we don't have to say
if Antushka wants to keep it rolling.
Well, we're going back to the history of sexuality next week.
Oh, that's right. You got more Foucault. Nice.
I got to go read about, the second volume. It's going to get quite provocative.
You should read The Law and Economics of Sexuality.
The oldest profession, they say.
By good old Dick Posner.
Yeah, good old Tricky Dick.
Tricky Dick, yeah. All right.
It's, of course, a Richard Nixon reference right there. That's what they used to call him, old Tricky Dick, or at least I think that's what they said in a Futurama episode.
Somebody called him that.
Someone called him that. I mean, maybe we will need to. It did, like I said, the last episode seemed to do well. And I think it makes sense because, again, what this made me realize is the implication of intellectual property is actually, or not the implication, the resonance, if you will. Intellectual property affects a lot of aspects in society. And I just didn't really consider that as much before reading this stuff.
Well, it's probably going to continue to grow. I mean, one of the things that you hear people talk about in economics is just how much, like, society, when you talk about first world societies, like, the economic landscape has moved away from, manufacturing, like, physical commodities to just the intellectual space, right?
Right. Because
that's all we make.
Because it's so easy. You come up with a piece of software, you patent it, you make millions. I mean, it's less so than it was 20 years ago, but that's I mean, it's incentivized a bunch of get rich quick stuff, and
so like I said, you and Antushka, you need to mobilize the masses who
we mobilize
listen to
no
this.
one. As we said in our John Locke, this was an episode title that I don't think did very well, but I don't know. It was Dear FBI, we are not trying to incite a revolution.
All right, so what are you going to title this one?
I don't know. Normally when I listen back through it during, editing, that's when I just figure out if there's anything funny that was said or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
He's an importer-exporter.
He imports things and he exports them.
Yeah. All right.
Cool. You got any gigs coming up you want to plug?
Definitely gigs coming up. No.
Come on.
I wish.
Are you speaking anywhere?
I don't. Yeah, when and Antushka playing?
May 3rd.
May
3rd.
3rd.
I believe, yeah. Celsius Brewery.
All right.
Austin, Texas. Come on out.
Nice.
It's going to be fun on the bun.
Come on out.
Fun on the bun.
There's got to be at least one listener in Austin, right?
Yeah, it's his wife. No. Actually, I take that back. I don't think she listens.
Oh, man. Probably not even, though, right?
No, yeah. I know she doesn't listen because he said it, which is fine. Yeah, I think that nobody should listen, really. No, just kidding.
Yeah.
Okay. We did it. All right. Sounds good.
Very good. Well.
See ya.